I was slicing lemons when I heard my boyfriend laugh in the dining room, the kind of laugh people use when they've already decided you're a joke. The sound sliced through the quiet hum of the kitchen. Kasaira Wynn froze mid-motion, her hand hovering above the cutting board. The scent of citrus filled the air, sharp and clean, so at odds with the rot she suddenly felt spreading in her chest. Gabriel Moreau's voice followed, low but edged with amusement, the kind of tone that turned charm into cruelty. "She really thinks this will change anything," he said. Another laugh joined his, lighter, feminine, dripping with the kind of confidence that always came from knowing too much. "Vivian. His sister." Cass's fingers tightened around the knife until her knuckles went white. The lemons blurred before her eyes. A laugh she once loved had become the sound of something breaking. She reached for the porcelain teacup beside her, the one with a fine crack running down its side, a hairline fracture she never fixed because it reminded her that beautiful things could still hold water, even when damaged. Now, as she stared into the empty cup, she wondered if she'd been the crack all along. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A notification from the Moreau family group chat, something they rarely included her in. For a moment, she hesitated. Then she swiped it open. The photo staring back at her made her breath catch. It was her proposal, the one she'd spent months developing for the small sustainable brand she was launching. Her designs, her notes, her plans. And now it was there, captioned by Vivi with a laughing emoji and the words. "Guess who's playing CEO again?" Cass's throat tightened. She hadn't shared that file with anyone but Gabe. Her hand shook as she set the phone down. The lemon juice stung the small cut on her finger, a tiny, invisible wound made visible. From the dining room came another burst of laughter, soft, conspiratorial. Cass pressed her palms against the counter, trying to steady her breathing. The kitchen felt smaller, the air thicker. Every sound seemed to mock her, the ticking clock, the dripping faucet, the muffled clink of Gabe's glass. For a moment, she thought about storming out there, demanding answers, showing them the crack in her cup and telling them this was what betrayal looked like. But instead, she stayed still. Listening. Memorizing. Because that's what Kasaira Wynn had always done best, she listened. And when the time came, she never forgot. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. Another laugh emoji. She looked at the cracked cup once more and whispered under her breath. "All right, Vivian. Let's see who laughs last." Outside, the lemons gleamed under the soft kitchen light, bright, bitter, and waiting. I used to think every good story began with a spark. Mine began with a spreadsheet. Gabe Moreau wasn't supposed to be anything more than a client. He had emailed my consultancy firm 2 years ago about branding realignment. I remember the message because it was so polished it almost felt flirtatious, each sentence perfectly spaced, punctuated, rehearsed. "We're looking for someone who understands authenticity," he wrote. Authenticity. From a man whose entire family made a living selling it online. When he walked into my office for the first time, the room seemed to contract around his confidence. Gabe was all casual elegance, rolled sleeves, expensive watch disguised as minimalism. He talked like someone used to being listened to, but he listened just enough to make you forget that. "I like your approach," he said after my presentation. "You make numbers sound poetic." I laughed, because that was easier than showing how that compliment hit me somewhere soft. I had built my business from late nights and lukewarm coffee, not charm. But he noticed the small things, the chipped mug, the overworked laptop, the notebook filled with crossed-out dreams. We met 3 times before he suggested dinner. Not the let's talk budget kind, real dinner, white tablecloth, a place that required reservations weeks ahead. I told myself it was networking. My assistant rolled her eyes so hard I could hear it through the phone. That night, I wore a navy dress that meant business but hoped for more. He arrived late, apologetic, flawless, carrying a single white orchid. "You seem like the kind who prefers something that lasts longer than roses," he said. I should have known then that he'd already studied me. The first few months were the kind that look good on screens. He'd tag me in pictures, laughing at rooftop bars, brunching at hotels with names I still can't pronounce. My muse, the captions would read. The followers adored it. I was the grounded consultant who'd captured the attention of the Moreau golden boy. Enter Vivian. I met her at a family dinner 6 weeks after Gabe made it official. The Moreau house sat on a hill that glittered at night, glass, chrome, curated perfection. There were cameras disguised as decor, and a scent diffuser that pumped vanilla musk into every corner. Vivian greeted me at the door with a kiss on both cheeks and a smile that barely touched her eyes. Kasira Wynn, she said like she was introducing a segment to her followers. Our resident genius. Her nails were the color of spilled wine. Dinner felt like an audition. Gabe's parents asked about my background, that word stretched like elastic. His mother, Celeste Moreau, wore silk the shade of champagne and a face practiced for high-definition cameras. You must feel very lucky, she said, tilting her head just enough to make it condescending. Gabe's always been so ambitious. Lucky. That word sat on my tongue like acid. Vivian sipped her drink, eyes glinting. Cass runs a consulting firm, right? How adorable. Like a little startup? Gabe chuckled softly, just enough for me to notice, not enough to defend. I smiled, the kind of smile you learn from long client meetings. We prefer boutique firm, actually. It sounds fancier when you charge invoices. Vivian's lips twitched. Cute. The night ended with a toast to family, and Celeste's ring clinking against crystal like a warning bell. I drove home in silence, watching the city lights smear across the windshield. Nan called that night, as if she felt the unease travel through blood. How did it go, darling? I hesitated. They're different. Different how? Polished. Loud. Like a commercial that never ends. She laughed softly, that dry, knowing sound of someone who's seen too much life to be fooled. Pretty smiles are often just armor, Cass. Don't mistake civility for kindness. I promised I wouldn't. I lied. Over the next year, the Moreau world swallowed me whole. There were launch parties, charity galas, endless posts tagged #FamilyFirst. Vivian turned every brunch into content, every confession into a quote for her followers. Transparency is healing, she'd say to the camera, eyes glassy with ring light glow. Gabe encouraged it. It's good exposure for you, he'd tell me, filming us mid-laugh. I learned to smile without thinking, but the cracks showed early. Small things. Comments about my clothes, you're so modest, it's refreshing, that really meant boring. Questions about my childhood that felt like scouting missions. Once, Vivian borrowed my tablet for inspo, and returned it logged into my drafts folder. When I mentioned it, she waved a manicured hand. Relax, Cass. You act like I'm stealing state secrets. Gabe told me not to overthink. She's harmless. Harmless people don't test your passwords for fun. Still, I stayed. Because belonging can be addictive when you've spent years outside velvet ropes. And because Gabe looked at me sometimes like I was the only real thing in his holographic life. Until the night he didn't. It was the Moreau's annual midsummer party, a production big enough to trend. Vivian wore a silver dress that caught every camera flash like it owed her light. Gabe introduced me to sponsors, creators, and micro-celebrities whose smiles flickered between envy and intrigue. Kasira Wynn, the brains behind Moreau Brand's turnaround, he said proudly, and for a second, I believed he meant it. But later, I caught snippets, Vivian laughing with her friends near the pool, mimicking my serious face, the way I took notes even at parties. She's so diligent, one friend said. Like a personal assistant you can't fire. My glass nearly shattered in my hand. When Gabe found me, he brushed a strand of hair from my face. Don't mind Vivi, he murmured. She's just jealous. Of what? I asked. He smiled, practiced, and patient. Of someone who doesn't need an audience. I wanted to believe him. I did. Nan visited 2 weeks later. The contrast between her faded linen dress and their marble countertops could have been art. She watched Gabe scroll through his phone during lunch and whispered to me later, he talks like a man who measures affection in followers. I laughed, uneasy. You think I made a mistake? She looked at me with those sharp blue eyes that had seen decades of human nature. We all make them, love. The trick is not letting them make us. Her words stayed tucked somewhere quiet, waiting. The first real fissure came during a campaign meeting. My firm had pitched a sustainability initiative for Moreau brand, clean manufacturing, community investment, real substance. Vivi showed up late, wearing sunglasses indoors, and announced she'd already partnered with a better influencer. Gabe sided with her. It's trendier, he said. Trendier. The word stabbed deeper than I expected. I realized then that to them, sincerity was a marketing tool. After the meeting, Vivi pulled me aside. Don't take it personally, Cass. You're smart, but smart doesn't always sell. She smiled that thin smile again. Still, you photograph well when you don't frown. That night I stood in my kitchen, my sanctuary, staring at my reflection in the dark window. The city outside blinked like a restless machine. I wondered when I had stopped being Kasaira Wynn and started being content. Months blurred into rehearsed happiness. Gabe and I moved in together. The apartment looked like a magazine spread, curated, neutral, lifeless. Every corner a potential backdrop. Sometimes, at night, when the cameras were off and the silence pressed too close, he'd reach for me, half asleep, whispering things he'd never say in daylight. You make me feel real, he'd murmur. I clung to that. Because if he needed me to feel real, maybe I still mattered. But the more I gave, the more the Moreaus took. Invitations became expectations. My work blurred into theirs. Even my successes were reframed as family triumphs. Then came the leak, the photo in the group chat that turned my dream into their punchline. That was the moment the lemons met the knife. And that's why, when I heard that laugh echo from the dining room, I didn't just hear betrayal. I heard every ignored warning, every swallowed retort, every time I'd chosen silence over confrontation. Nan once told me, when people show you their mirrors, look closer. Sometimes it's glass. Sometimes it's a window. I finally saw through mine. The drawer wasn't supposed to be a vault. It started as a place for receipts and expired business cards. But grief makes archivists out of us all. The day after the laugh, Kasaira Wynn moved through her apartment like a ghost who hadn't realized she'd died. The lemons were still on the counter, their scent dulled overnight, the teacup with its crack still sitting in the same spot. She didn't cry. Crying felt too generous for people who didn't deserve her salt. Instead, she opened her office door, sat down at her desk, and stared at the empty drawer to her right. A small voice in her head whispered, "Remember." So she began. The first thing she placed inside was a screenshot, the group chat message with her leaked proposal and Vivian's emoji laugh. Then came the printed receipt of the lunch meeting Gabe had forgotten to tell her about, the one where Vivi tagged along and pitched Cass's ideas as her own. At first, the drawer filled slowly. A week later, it was a ritual. Whenever something small went wrong, an email mysteriously missing, a brand deal accidentally cancelled, a snide comment from Celeste caught on video, Cass added it to the collection. Each item was proof of the things people swore were nothing. She started calling it the list in the drawer. Not out loud, but in her mind, like a prayer she didn't want anyone else to hear. 2 weeks later, she texted Rory Calder. Rory had been her shadow since childhood, the boy who once soldered together broken toys and, years later, fixed her first hacked website without asking for payment. He was a quiet genius, running his own cybersecurity startup in a cluttered loft that smelled of coffee and solder smoke. She wrote, "Cass, how hard is it to tell if someone's been in my files?" Rory, "Depends." Why? Cass, "Because I think someone's been turning my life into their side hustle." He replied with a single line that made her chest tighten. Rory, "Keep records." Always. Truth rots without air. That afternoon, she took her laptop to his workspace. Rory was the opposite of the Moreaus in every way. His shirts were wrinkled, his laughter uncurated, and his phone screen cracked because it still works fine. When she explained what had been happening, the leaks, the jokes, the strange coincidences, he didn't laugh. He just turned his chair toward her and said, "Let's see what ghosts we find." He ran diagnostics, tracing access logs from her shared drive. The results were worse than she'd imagined. Vivi had logged in multiple times under Cass's old credentials. She'd downloaded client proposals, altered metadata, and in one case, even replied to an investor pretending to be Cass, politely declining a partnership that would have doubled her firm's revenue. Cass stared at the screen, her pulse hammering. "She was pretending to be me," she whispered. Rory's jaw tightened. "And Gabe didn't notice?" Cass swallowed. "Or didn't care?" He leaned back, eyes softening. "You always wanted to believe the best in people. That's your strength and your weakness." She exhaled shakily. "So what do I do now?" "Document." Quietly. "You've got your list, now expand it. Collect patterns, timestamps, behavior. Don't confront yet." "Why not?" He looked at her then, serious in a way that made her uneasy. "Because they think you're naive. That's power. Use it." That night, Cass went home with a flash drive full of evidence and a heart full of silence. She opened the drawer again, added a label to the folder, "Mirror Files." The name made her smile bitterly. Vivi always said she was a mirror, whatever people project on you, you reflect back. Fine. Let's reflect. A few days later, Nan showed up unannounced, carrying a grocery bag and a look that meant she knew everything without needing to ask. "I made soup," Nan said simply, setting it on the stove like an offering. "Now tell me who needs cursing." Cass laughed, the first real one in days. "It's not that dramatic." Nan raised a brow. "You made a list, didn't you?" Cass froze. "How did you?" "Because women like us always do. The drawer, the box, the notebook under the bed, same story, different century." She ladled the soup into bowls, her rings clinking against the ceramic. "When people think you're a fool, stay quiet," she said softly. "Fools see everything and live to tell it. The loud ones burn out before the ending." Cass stirred her spoon, watching the steam curl up like secrets escaping. "So I just wait?" she asked. "You watch," Nan corrected. "And you learn what kind of enemy you're becoming." Days turned into weeks. Cass grew quieter, sharper. She listened to conversations like they were recordings, noticing patterns in tone, repetition, pauses. Gabe talked less to her and more to his followers. Vivian's online persona glowed brighter than ever. New deals, new interviews, always some variation of a women supporting women. Each time she posted, Cass took a screenshot. The drawer filled. The house began to feel like a set. Every room carried echoes of something rehearsed. Gabe's laugh, once warm, now sounded like a sound effect added in post-production. One evening, as he filmed a live stream in the living room, Cass watched from the doorway. His words were smooth, charming, full of gratitude for the people who make me who I am. Vivian sat beside him, glowing in ring light, smiling as if Betrayal were a brand collaboration. Cass went back to her office, opened the drawer, and stared at her collection, her private museum of deceit. She whispered, "Not yet," and closed it gently. Rory sent her periodic updates. He'd uncovered deleted chats, fake accounts linked to Vivian's devices, even a trail of forwarded emails leading to Gabe's inbox. "She's been feeding him dirt on you," he said over a call. "Making you look unstable, controlling, paranoid. He's buying it." Cass's hand tightened on the phone. "So they're both in it." "Looks that way. But don't confront. Let them think you're breaking down. It'll make your proof hit harder later." She smiled faintly. "Nan would like you." He chuckled. "That's because Nan terrifies me." Cass began cataloging her emotions like evidence too. Anger. Disbelief. Nostalgia. Each one folded neatly into her resolve. She started journaling again, but the entries read like reports. Gabe canceled dinner, claimed sponsor emergency. Vivi posted photo from same restaurant. Or, email from client vanished. Found Vivi pitching same idea 2 days later. Every sentence ended with a timestamp. Every memory became a weapon waiting to be sharpened. Sometimes, late at night, she'd sit in front of the drawer and wonder what the final item would be, the thing that turned her from collector to avenger. Nan called one evening as rain tapped softly on the windows. "Still watching?" she asked. "Yes." "Still quiet?" "For now." Nan hummed approvingly. "Good. Silence has gravity, Cass. Let them orbit it long enough, and they'll mistake it for weakness. Then, when you move, they'll never see it coming." Cass looked at the drawer, at the layers of paper and pixels and pain. "I think," she said slowly, "they've already stopped seeing me." Nan's voice was calm, almost proud. "Then you've already won half the battle." That night, Cass labeled her latest file, Phase 1, Collection Complete. She closed the drawer for the last time that week and allowed herself a small, unflinching smile. They had taught her to live for appearances. Now she'd use appearances to destroy them. Outside, the city pulsed with artificial light. In her reflection, Cass didn't look like the woman who sliced lemons in a kitchen anymore. She looked like someone rebuilding herself from evidence and silence. Her eyes caught the faint line of the cracked teacup on her desk, repaired now, gold running through the fracture like lightning. She whispered, "You're not broken if you're sharper." And somewhere, between fury and focus, Kasira Wynn stopped being the victim of a laugh and became the author of her revenge. I always believed revenge began in fire, that it roared and burned and demanded to be seen. But it doesn't. It starts in silence. It starts with a small, calculated choice, like deciding how much sugar to stir into your tea, or how long to let someone talk before you let them hang themselves with their own words. The morning I invited Gabriel and Vivian for brunch, the air smelled of citrus and reckoning. The same dining room, the same table, the same laugh that had once gutted me, only this time, I was the one setting the scene. The Moreaus arrived as if they were showing up for a magazine shoot. Gabe, in his sand-colored linen shirt and careless grin that used to disarm me. Vivian, in a white dress too innocent to be honest, carrying a bouquet of pale peonies that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Cass, you look lovely," Vivian said in that high-sweet voice that always meant the opposite. "Thank you," I replied smoothly, motioning toward the table. "I made lemon tea. You both liked it last time, right?" Her smile faltered for half a second, enough to make my heart hum. Because the last time we'd all sat at that table, she'd whispered to Gabe that I didn't know how to make proper tea. That my kitchen experiments were aesthetic but tragic. Not today. The table was simple but perfect, porcelain cups, pale yellow tablecloth, a vase of Nan's garden roses in the center. Every detail chosen to whisper control. As they sat, I felt that same dull-like twist inside me, the one that had haunted me since the night I'd overheard Gabe laugh about me like I was a failed punchline. But this time, I refused to drown in it. I'd learned that pain was only power left unused. "So," I said lightly, pouring the tea. "I heard an interesting rumor about the Fontaine Gala last month. Apparently someone tried to fake an invite?" Vivian blinked, once, twice. Her lips twitched. "Oh. That's news to me." "Really?" I tilted my head, smiling. "Because a few people mentioned your name. Something about an RSVP mix-up with the sponsors?" Her laugh was brittle. "People love to talk. You know how they are." "Oh, I do." I let the spoon clink gently against the rim of my cup. "Funny, though, the same people said the rumor started with someone from your PR circle. Someone close to home." Gabe shifted uncomfortably. "Cass, maybe." I cut him off with a smile so soft it could cut glass. "It's fine, darling. Just gossip. I'm sure the truth always comes out in the end." Vivian's throat bobbed as she reached for her teacup. I watched her stir sugar, too quickly, too many times, her tell. She'd been caught, and she knew it. The beauty of it all? I didn't need to raise my voice or throw a drink. I just had to let her squirm in the silence she'd once weaponized against me. Halfway through brunch, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then at me, then paled slightly. I already knew what she'd seen. Pippa Vale's blog had just updated, brunch blunders at the Moreau house, sources say that the Golden siblings are showing cracks over tea. The headline glowed on my screen too. Pippa, the local gossip blogger who lived 2 streets over, had always been hungry for family drama. I'd made sure to tip her off that something interesting might happen today. Vivian slammed her cup down a little too hard, the tea spilling onto the white linen. Gabe's jaw tightened. "Viv, what's going on?" "Nothing," she snapped. "Just people who need to mind their business." I folded my napkin neatly, pretending not to enjoy the sight. Oh, that's the problem with gossip. Once it's out, you can't really stuff it back in. Can you? Her eyes flicked up, sharp and venomous. You think you're clever, don't you? I met her gaze, calm, steady. I think I've learned. Nan's voice echoed in my head like a hymn, if they think you're a fool, stay quiet. Fools see everything and live to tell it. Vivian forced a brittle laugh. Well, this has been fun. She pushed her chair back. I'll be in touch, Gabe. When the door finally shut behind her, the silence she left was heavy but cleansing. Gabe sat back, exhaling. What the hell was that? Just tea, I said softly, clearing the cups. And maybe a truth that didn't taste as sweet as she expected. He frowned, confused, trying to piece together the subtle shift in me, the calm he couldn't read anymore. I'd once given him every part of my heart like it was something he could fix. Now I kept my heart like fine china, visible, fragile, but never again handed over. That night, I sat by my window, rereading Pippa's post. The comments were brutal, strangers dissecting Vivian's every word, every outfit, every gesture. The same scrutiny she had loved turning on others now cornered her. I didn't feel joy. Not exactly. Just balance. Because revenge, I was learning, wasn't about making someone hurt. It was about restoring the symmetry of what they broke. As the city lights flickered beyond the glass, I opened the drawer beside my desk, the one that held my list. Receipts. Screenshots. Notes. Tiny injustices that used to sting. I added a new entry. Lemon tea, she lied, and the world watched. Then I closed the drawer with a quiet satisfaction. Some wars are fought with weapons. Mine would be fought with patience, porcelain, and tea. And for the first time in months, I smiled, not because I'd won, but because I'd finally learned how to play. The night I found out what Vivian had really done, the house felt like a stranger's. Too quiet. Too polished. Too still. The lemon scent from that brunch still lingered in the air, faint and deceptive, as if the walls themselves were pretending nothing had happened. But silence has weight. It presses. It waits. I sat in my home office, the only light coming from the screen in front of me, its blue glow painting my face in half-shadows. My heart was steady, but my fingers trembled just enough that I had to grip my mug with both hands. Tea again, always tea. Nan said tea kept the hands busy when the mind needed to be still. Rory Calder's message had come an hour earlier. Rory, found something. Sending you a secure link. Don't open it until you're alone. Rory was my oldest friend, the one who knew me before I became Cass Wynne, consultant of the Moreaus. He was the reason I even understood encryption, privacy settings, and cloud permissions. A quiet tech wizard with messy curls, coffee-stained hoodies, and an intuition sharp enough to slice through digital deceit. The link sat in my inbox like a loaded weapon. I clicked it. A secure drive opened, a folder labeled Project Starling. For a moment, I thought it was just another client file Vivi had accidentally shared, something dull, maybe personal. But Rory's warning echoed in my head. So I opened it carefully. Inside were subfolders. Screenshots. Emails. Scanned contracts. All labeled with my name. Cassira_win_IP_legal. Client leak _March. Data _theft _case notes. Each one hit like a body blow. The first file was an email thread between me and an investor, except I'd never written it. The tone was off. Too casual. Too desperate. Cass signing off with fake promises of confidential data. Attached were fabricated documents, proposals mixed with real fragments from my work, stitched together like a Frankenstein confession. Vivian had been impersonating me. I scrolled further, each click louder than the last. Screenshots of my messages, edited to look incriminating. Meetings I never attended. Even photographs of me leaving my own firm late at night, twisted by captions like, "Caught after hours again." My pulse thudded in my ears. The air thickened. I leaned back, clutching the edge of the desk. This wasn't gossip. This was war. Vivi hadn't just wanted to embarrass me, she'd built an entire narrative designed to end my career. To make me look corrupt. Dishonest. Disposable. And the cruelest part? She'd done it perfectly, quietly, strategically, like she'd studied me long enough to learn every weakness worth weaponizing. The screen blurred for a moment before I realized I was crying. I wiped my face and forced myself to keep reading. At the bottom of the folder, a document labeled Statement_Draft. I opened it and felt the world tilt. It was a fake press statement, written in a tone so sterile it could have come from any PR office. Following recent allegations of misconduct, Ms. Kasaira Wynn will be stepping down from her position effective immediately. We remain committed to transparency and accountability. She'd already written my professional obituary. I heard my phone buzz. Rory again. Rory, Cass. You okay? Me, she was going to destroy me. Rory, she still could. But now you have proof. Me, I don't even know how to process this. Rory, one thing at a time. Save everything. Don't tell Gabe yet. And call your nan. I stared at the last line. Call your nan. The clock read 11:42 p.m. But I dialed anyway. Nan always said she never really slept, just waited between dreams. She answered on the second ring, her voice raspy but alert. Cass, darling. What's wrong? I didn't cry, not really. My voice came out flat, detached, like I was narrating someone else's tragedy. It's Vivian. She made a fake trail. Emails. Proof that I leaked data. Rory found it. She's been planning this for months. Nan was silent for a heartbeat. Then, softly, when a snake shows its skin, don't scream. Step on it quietly. Her words hung in the dim air, heavy and wise. Nan, I want to tell everyone. I want to show Gabe. I want to. You want to win, she interrupted gently. And winning isn't loud, Kasaira. It's patient. I pressed my palm against my forehead, the tears hot now. She could have ruined me. But she didn't, Nan said. Because snakes always shed when they think they're safe. You just have to decide what to do with the skin they leave behind. I laughed through the tears, the sound jagged and bitter. You make it sound easy. Oh, nothing about revenge is easy. That's why most people ruin themselves doing it. But you're not a most people, are you? Her voice softened. You'll handle this like a win, quietly, gracefully, effectively. Now listen to me, love. Make copies. Don't confront her yet. Let her think she still has the upper hand. And when the time comes, step lightly but leave a mark she'll never wash off. When the call ended, I sat for a long time staring at the glow of the screen. My reflection stared back, tired, hollow-eyed, but steadier. Then I opened a new folder on my computer, mirroring Vivi's. I titled it, Project Sunflower. Nan always loved sunflowers, she said they turn to the light but never forget where the sun rises. I started dragging files over. Screenshots, message logs, my personal notes. I organized everything by date, cross-referenced with the fake documents Vivi had made. Each piece of her deceit had a timestamp, a pattern. By 2 a.m., I had enough evidence to prove digital impersonation, defamation, and fraud. The legal weight of it hit me all at once. This wasn't just betrayal, it was criminal. I leaned back, closing my eyes, breathing slowly, then something flickered on the drive, a notification. Someone had just accessed Project Starling. My heart stopped. Rory's message popped up seconds later. Rory, she's online. Don't touch anything. Log out now. I slammed the lid of my laptop shut, pulse racing. In the darkness, I could still see her face, that perfect, polished smile she wore in every photo. The kind of smile that said you'll never catch me. But I had. And now, for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the dark. I sat there, breathing in the stillness, Nan's voice a whisper in the back of my mind, step on it quietly. That's when I realized something. Vivi had built her story around my supposed weakness, my quietness, my politeness, my restraint. She thought my silence meant surrender. She had no idea silence was my weapon. And when I finally stepped, she'd never see it coming. There are moments when you know you're walking into a war, and still, you smooth your hair, fix your smile, and walk in anyway. That night, I dressed like someone preparing for both celebration and battle. The silver silk gown clung just enough to whisper confidence, the kind of quiet armor that didn't glitter, but reflected everything around it. I pinned my hair in a low twist, simple, deliberate. Nan used to say, a woman in silver never has to shout, she just has to stand in the light. The Moreau mansion shimmered like a scene from one of Vivi's overfiltered posts, crystal chandeliers, mirrored walls, the faint scent of expensive lilies that couldn't hide the rot underneath. Gabe was hosting a formal dinner to celebrate his new business deal, a partnership with investors who worshipped appearances almost as much as the Moreaus worshipped themselves. Every chair, every glass, every flower was perfection. But what I noticed most were the reflections, distorted, fractured in the crystal. That's what this family was. Shiny. Fragile. Breakable. I arrived deliberately late. Eyes turned when I entered, whispers curling through the room like smoke. Vivi sat near the head of the long glass table, wearing red, of course. Always needing to be the flame in someone else's oxygen. Cass, she purred when I approached, I was afraid you wouldn't come. It's been so long since we've seen you at one of these. I needed a reason, I said smoothly. Gabe's deal seemed worth toasting. Gabe smiled, that politician's smile that used to make my knees weak. Tonight it only made my stomach twist. Always good to see you, Cass. Hope you brought your sharp mind, there'll be business talk. Oh, I said lightly, I always bring sharp things. Laughter flickered awkwardly around the table. Vivi's eyes narrowed. Dinner began. Crystal chimed. Polite conversation floated between courses. But beneath it, tension pulsed like an electrical current, one I had wired myself. I'd sent the event coordinator a USB drive earlier that day, under the pretense of helping Gabe with his slideshow, a few company highlights, investor slides, numbers, harmless celebration visuals. But one of those slides wasn't harmless. One of them contained Vivi's own words. Her messages. Her cruelty. Her plots. It wasn't revenge yet. It was truth, dressed up as a mistake. As dessert was served, Gabe rose to toast the evening. To family, he began, and to the future. He gestured to the screen behind him. I thought we'd show something fun, a quick highlight reel of the company's journey. The projector flickered to life. Photos of smiling employees, office parties, champagne pops. Then, a text thread appeared. Black background. White font. Familiar timestamps. Vivi Moreau, 8:42 p.m. She actually thinks she's part of the family. Pathetic. Vivi Moreau, 8:45 p.m. If Gabe knew half of what I told investors, she'd be gone. The room froze. Forks hovered midair. Someone whispered, "Is that?" Gabe's face drained of color. What the? The screen shifted again, showing a screenshot of an email draft, one from Project Starling. The fabricated files, the fake signatures. My name attached to lies. I hadn't needed to display everything, just enough for everyone to realize something dark had been happening behind closed doors. Vivi shot to her feet, voice trembling but venomous. Turn that off. Now. No one moved. Cameras flashed. Phones lifted. Pippa Vale, of course she was here, invited as a press. Her thumbs flew across her screen. I could already imagine the headline. Moreau dinner disaster, family secrets spill over champagne. Gabe grabbed the remote, shutting the screen down. Viv, what the hell is this? She turned on me, eyes blazing. You did this. You're trying to ruin us. I tilted my head slightly, voice calm. It looks like you already handled that yourself. Gasps rippled through the room. I watched the panic bloom in her eyes, the realization that her perfect image was cracking, live, in front of every person who mattered to her. For a moment, the silence was thick enough to break with a breath. Then, softly, I said, funny thing about lies. They never stay where you put them. The dinner ended in chaos, guests pretending to take calls, investors muttering excuses, Gabe's PR team whispering damage control strategies into their champagne glasses. I slipped away, unnoticed, down the hall toward the terrace. The night air was cold and clear. My pulse was still hammering, but it wasn't guilt I felt, it was relief. The truth was out, even if it had to bleed to breathe. Then my phone buzzed. A notification. Vivian Moreau, new post. I opened it and felt my stomach drop. It was an audio file. My voice, except not my words. Edited. Twisted. If Gabe's company goes under, I'll make sure it's his fault. He deserves it. The caption read. Proof of sabotage. Some people never change. Within minutes, the comments exploded. Wow, Caswin really said that? So she was bitter all along. Typical ex pretending to be the victim. My hands went cold. I could almost hear Vivi laughing somewhere inside the house, that sharp, satisfied sound that once sliced through my trust like a blade. The dinner had been a victory, but she'd been ready. My revelation had forced her hand, but she'd struck back harder. My phone buzzed again, a message from Rory. Rory, I'm on it. Don't panic. She used AI voice cloning. I'll prove it. Me, she's faster than I thought. Rory, then we'll be smarter. Inside, I could hear Gabe's raised voice, confused, angry, torn. Pippa's voice somewhere near the foyer, this is going viral, you know. It's everywhere. I stepped out further into the dark, looking at my reflection in the glass door, pale, shaken, silver catching the light like armor cracked, but not broken. For the first time since I'd begun this war, I realized something terrifying. When you fight a liar, you have to expect them to lie better than you can tell the truth. But Nan's voice came back to me, steady and sure. The truth doesn't panic, Kasaira. It waits. So I took a slow breath, slid my phone into my clutch, and walked back toward the chaos. The night wasn't over. And neither was I. The first time a uniformed officer crossed my apartment threshold, the world tilted and then steadied in a way that made my breath catch. It was a sound I'd heard in movies, the careful knock, the polite clearing of a throat, but in real life it felt louder, final, as if someone had announced the end of a chapter one still hoped to edit. Detective Javed Mansour introduced himself with the kind of calm that comes from having seen too many arguments burn out before they ever started. He wore his ears lightly, salt at the temple, a blazer that had seen better press conferences, and eyes that folded around the truth. In the way of people trained to find it. He sat opposite me at my kitchen table, notebook open, pen poised in a way that was both respectful and relentless. You must be Kasaira Wynn, he said, and when I nodded he continued, I'm Detective Mansour. I know this is difficult, we'll keep it simple. I just need to walk through the events leading up to last night, your relationship with Gabriel Moreau, and any conflicts you can think of. The question sounded ordinary until it wasn't. His presence transformed my apartment from refuge into an interrogation room, the lemon-scented air suddenly clinical, the chipped teacup on the counter a piece of evidence rather than a talisman. I told the story from the beginning the way you tell a memory that's still sticky with emotion, carefully, measured, keeping the parts one was ashamed of at arm's length. I explained my business, our first meetings, the Moreau dinners, the way Vivian's smile had always felt like a camera lens. I explained how the proposal had appeared in their family chat. I explained the folder Rory had found. Detective Mansour asked follow-ups in that soft, non-judgmental cadence designed to get guarded people to open. He asked about communication history, who texted whom, whether I'd ever shared anything with Gabe that was marked confidential, whether anyone had access to my drive. I answered as honestly as I could, but honesty in these moments felt like standing naked under bright light. It was vulnerable and clarifying in equal measure. "You were at the dinner last night?" he asked at one point, eyes scanning his notes. "Yes," I said. "I was there when the texts showed. I left before the audio clip went public." He nodded. "And you have documentation that shows you were impersonated?" "Yes." My voice was small but steady. "Rory has copies. Logs, timestamps, metadata. He's been helping me collect everything." Detective Mansour's gaze softened a fraction. He had the look of a man who'd seen the way reputations could be stitched into lies so neatly they were hard to unravel. "We'll need those. If there's evidence of impersonation, that's a serious offense. It can be fraud, defamation, possibly identity theft." Hearing the words felt like a sharp, brief warmth, hope tempered by dread. Legal terminology is sterile but clinical. It doesn't do the work of comforting. But it does offer structure, a path to follow through chaos. I thanked him. I told him I'd email Rory's files, and he took down the details in a slow, meticulous script. After he left, I sat at the table and watched the dust in the air drift through the kitchen light. The apartment felt both emptied and full, the silence heavy with the possibility of action. My phone vibrated, a message from Rory, terse and technical. "Rory, I extracted the timestamps. It's messy, but we can prove cloning and forged headers. Need a secure channel to send." Relief flared and then tempered immediately. Proving technical fakery is one thing, convincing people who profit from a narrative designed to cover that fakery is another. I poured fresh tea, the steam a small, ordinary comfort. The next morning's blurred. My inbox filled with requests from the detective, calls from my lawyer, whom Nan insisted I secure immediately, and messages from clients asking if the rumors were true. My assistant handled the worst of the inquiries with practiced calm. I sat on the edges of conversations like an observer, cataloging the pangs that hit each time someone asked if the scandal might affect ongoing projects. Rory became my midnight ghost. He'd been there earlier, shoulders hunched over glowing screens in my living room, knitting together timestamps that, taken alone, were faint and nearly invisible. He showed me logs that revealed access points, IP addresses that bounced through VPNs, and altered metadata timestamped to the exact hour Vivian claimed to be at a gala, which was impossible because the GPS data showed her phone in a different part of town that night. He drew me diagrams on a napkin, mapping the flow of fabricated files as if the forgeries were tributaries leading back to a source. "You'll want to show the pattern," he said quietly, "not just the pieces themselves. The law cares about intent and method. Show that this was planned, repeated, and designed to injure you." I listened. I made notes. My chest ached with a kind of tiredness that seeped through bone and thought. The detective's visits continued, those polite, surgical interviews that demanded a clarity of memory I sometimes couldn't guarantee. Recounting the same incidents felt like unpicking the same scab over and over. But each time I told the story, it gained precision. Each retelling tightened the lines of what had happened, carving it into a shape that witnesses and proofs could fit. One evening, with rain tattooing the windows, Nan arrived with thermoses and a look that said she had already been briefed and found the news appalling. She sat across from me, hands folded, listening without interrupting. After I'd explained the latest development, the detective's interest, Rory's findings, the audio clip Vivian had posted, she reached over and squeezed my hand. "That they've built their lives on glass, Cass," she said, using the nickname she reserved for when the conversation needed to be both practical and tender. "People like them make art out of reflection. They need their world to look whole. You don't need to destroy the mirror. You just need the right stone." Her metaphor landed like a small, cold stone, precise, inevitable. "What does that look like?" I asked. Sometimes asking the practical question was a way to be brave. It looks like patience, she answered. It looks like showing the truth in a way that cannot be edited away. You get their pattern, then you reveal the machine that runs it. Leave no seam unexposed. And do it in a place where the audience cannot be bought with charm and filtered smiles. She paused, as if choosing the words might carve them sharper. When you move, move cleanly. Make sure there's nowhere they can hide. I thought about my list in the drawer, the Project Sunflower folder now thick with files. I thought about the gala, the dinner, the projection, and the audio clip that had felt like a sucker punch. I thought about how Vivian had always been practiced at making herself look pure and surprised, the optics perfected by a hand that never trembled. I don't want to wait for justice, I said finally, the words tasting like iron. It was darker than resignation, it was a decision. I'm going to make it inevitable. Nan smiled, small and fierce. Good, she said. Justice is a slow engine. If you want it to run faster, you have to feed it with the right coal. The choice to manufacture a justice, as I called it later in my head, wasn't an admission of lawlessness so much as a refusal to be passive in the face of machine-made ruination. There are legal channels, courts, subpoenas, detectives. But institutions move slowly, and in the meantime, reputations rot. People forget to look twice. I was tired of waiting for the world to correct its mistakes. I wanted the correction to be visible and immediate. Rory agreed to coordinate the technical aspect, a secure package for the detective, redundant copies for my lawyer, and a cleaned set for a legal deposition that could be shown in court. He also set up an air-gapped drive, a physical, offline copy that could be presented in person without the risk of remote tampering. I felt a shiver of gratitude and wariness watching him work with a kind of tender efficiency. Hands steady, eyes narrowed with focus. I hired a communications consultant through a colleague who owed me a favor. She was blunt and practical and, in that way, wonderfully useful. You can't outshout a lie once it's viral, she told me, but you can change where people look. We'll change the frame. You show them the evidence in a context they trust, legal, journalistic, archival. Make the venue the messenger. The plan that took shape was methodical and cold in its logic. We would feed the detective and the prosecutor everything Rory unearthed, get a formal forensic analysis, and then present the findings at a well-timed press conference with a reputable journalist who had vouched for integrity. The press conference would be public, documented, and structured so that the facts would stand on their own merit, supported by legal affidavits and raw, verifiable data. No fear-driven live streams, no emotion-driven pleas. The truth would be threaded through procedure until there was nowhere to hide. But even with a plan, the nights were long. Each time my phone buzzed with an incoming message from an unknown number, my stomach dropped. Each time a client called to ask what the headlines meant, I felt the rope of reputation tighten around my neck. I also watched the Moreau machine continue to spin, their carefully staged social posts, their PR hits, the soft, indignant statements from Gabe about how hurtful misinformation can be. The optics war continued even as the legal one took shape. It was exhausting, infuriating, and oddly clarifying. The more they tried to reclaim the narrative with charm, the more obvious their reliance on a borrowed gloss became. People who live by reflection rarely withstand direct light. One late night, Rory came over with an exhausted grin and a thick manila folder. Legally admissible copies, he said, tapping the edge. We exported everything raw, put it on air-gapped drives, and I wrote up a timeline. It's messy, but it's coherent. You'll need to testify about your process, but the digital trail is there. I opened the folder and let the weight of it settle into my lap. Paper has a gravity that screens don't. It felt like something that could be carried into a courtroom, into a newsroom, into a space where edited charm meant very little. It felt like armor. You've done more than I could have asked, I told him. My voice cracked but steadied. He shrugged with that strange modesty of people who know their hands do the real work. You made me do my favorite thing, find a needle in a haystack. And besides, he added, softer, you'd do the same for me. The days blurred into a rhythm of preparation, talking to the detective, fine-tuning the public stance with the communications consultant, scheduling the formal release of information in a place where truth would be measured against legal standards rather than clicks. I slept fitfully, dreaming in fragments of CEO presentations and projection screens, of glass tables and laughter, of the moment the audio clip had first played and my chest had gone hollow. And through it all, I kept the drawer, the list, locked. It was both relic and roadmap. Nan would call sometimes and say, simply, rest in the way you can. There's power in not being consumed by your own storm. Her voice cut through the static of my worry like a bell. The decision to manufacture the exposure felt heavy and righteous and terrifying in equal measure. It required patience, precision, and an acceptance that some things would be lost in the public unspooling, old friendships, habits, perhaps even the person I'd been before the Moreaus. But when I imagined the eventual clearing of my name, the idea settled into me like a steady light. I was not naive about the cost. I knew that when machines of influence unspooled, collateral damage didn't always respect boundaries. I also knew I could not let fear of that stop me. If justice required me to be louder and cleaner and smarter than their noise, then I would become all three. The detective called one afternoon with a quiet urgency. "We'll need a formal statement," he said. "Make it exact. Dates, times, who had access. We'll move quickly." His tone threaded care with the kind of efficiency I had come to rely on. "Thank you," I said, thinking of the manila folder and the nights of quiet work, the list in the drawer, Nan's small fury, Rory's steadfast hands. "Tell me when." "Soon," he said. "And Cass, don't talk to the press alone. Let us coordinate." I closed my laptop with the deliberate slowness of someone closing a door behind them. Outside, the city hustled on, indifferent to the drama of human reputations. Inside, I felt the gears shift, the plan taking shape. When the sun went down, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of lemon tea and the drawer closed, but within reach. Nan's words echoed again, "Find the right stone." I looked at the teacup, the crack running like a map. The path forward was finite and precise, the aim no longer chaotic but engineered. The night before we were to hand the files to the authorities, I made a small list and slid it into the drawer, clear objectives, names, dates. It felt ceremonial, oddly calm. I breathed in the lemon-scented air and whispered into the quiet, "I will not be erased. Some fights are messy. Some are quiet." I was learning that both could be true at once. And as exhaustion folded into a brittle determination, I realized that manufacturing justice wasn't about theatrics, it was about removing the scaffolding under a lie until it toppled of its own weight. Whatever came next, I would be ready to make the stone fall. By the time I scheduled the meeting with Amon Cortez, the word partner felt less like a title and more like a shield, something someone put on when they needed cover. Amon's reputation was slick, a man who wore tailored suits and a smile that suggested he knew the backstage prices of everything. He'd always been the practical mind behind Gabe's showmanship, the one who turned charm into currency. We chose a cafe equidistant from the Moreau loft and my apartment, a place with exposed brick and a barista who didn't smile like she was being filmed. I arrived early and sat with my hands folded around a cup of lemon tea, old habits die slow, and a small piece of the teacup's crack tucked into my palm like a talisman. Rory had told me to meet him alone. "Keep it quiet," he'd said. "Don't give them anything to weaponize." Amon arrived with the kind of punctuality that was more about image than necessity. He scanned the room, then approached with a measured gait, greeting me with a single, efficient nod before sitting down. His eyes were careful, not unfriendly, like a man who thinks in spreadsheets and knows the price of apologies. "Kasaira," he said. "Thank you for meeting me." I folded my napkin and smiled in a way that was entirely unwelcoming. "Amon. You've been very busy." There was no small talk. "Not tonight." The coffee steamed between us as if hesitant to interrupt. I watched him as he arranged his hands on the table, deliberate, practiced. He smelled faintly of cedar and cologne that would photograph well. "You sent me a list," he said. "I know why." "You were part of it," I answered quietly. Rory found the access logs. Project Starling references a chain of accounts. Your firm's servers show routing. A flicker crossed his face, just a micro-expression, gone before I could name it. You'll have to be more specific. I slid a printed timeline across the table. The dates marched in neat rows, leaked emails, doctored proposals, investor calls diverted. The day a client declined a meeting because a forged email had clarified my priorities. I watched his jaw tighten as he read. Aman, I said slowly, did you know Vivian was impersonating me? That she'd been fabricating correspondence and feeding it into the investor pipeline? He set the folder down like it hurt. For a second, he looked every inch the man who ran the numbers behind the empire, worn thin at the edges. Look, Kasaira. Business is messy. Sometimes optics have to be managed. We didn't want a scandal. Managing optics doesn't involve forging signatures. My voice was steady, colder than the lemon tea cooling in my cup. It doesn't involve creating a paper trail to make me look criminal. Aman's shoulders sagged almost imperceptibly. We thought it would be contained. We thought if we spun the narrative, it would be easier to steer. Steer? I repeated, incredulous. You steered me over the edge. He looked away, absently stirring his coffee. There are stakes, Cass. Investors don't like uncertainty. Gabe's position was vulnerable. People panic when they smell instability. Somebody needed to hold the course. And the cost? I asked. Your cost was my career? You're complicating things. He rubbed his temple. You make it personal. It's personal because you made it personal. I could feel the anger rise like heat under the silver silk I'd worn to the dinner months ago. You targeted me. Aman's face hardened. If you're looking for a villain, Kasaira, I'm sorry. I am pragmatic. Sometimes the remedy feels like harm. I set my hands flat on the table, reaching toward the thing I'd come for, the truth, laid out in print and timestamp and schema. Who else is involved? I asked. Was this just Vivian and you, or is there someone ordering the orchestra? His eyes flicked to the window, to the reflection of passers-by, as if searching for an escape route in the glass. There were conversations, he admitted quietly. People talk. Stakes are discussed. But I never meant, he stopped, because words had a way of making real the things people preferred to keep hypothetical. The cafe hummed with other lives, a toddler cried somewhere in the back, a woman argued gently over a phone. I concentrated on Aman's confession like a signal. If he was willing to speak, maybe he was willing to do more. Why come to me? I asked. If you were complicit, why risk talking now? He looked at me with an honesty that surprised me in its rawness. Because Aman Cortez has lived in panic for a year, he said. I've watched Gabe flounder sometimes, make decisions that could ruin what we built. I thought silence was the answer, but silence made monsters. And Vivian, she's not just vindictive. She's efficient. I saw the consequences ripple. Investors left notes. People were mean. I thought I could control a small fire. I was wrong. This was nearer to confession than I expected. The offer it implied, though, was what mattered. I had come prepared for a man who would deny everything, who would double down and protect his ledger. Instead, I saw a man who had miscalculated both the poison and the fallout. What do you want in return for telling me this? I asked. There was no relish in asking. Only necessity. Aman's jaw worked. He had the look of someone bargaining for his freedom. Immunity, he said plainly. If I help you bring the full truth out, names, files, the server logs, my legal exposure will be significant. But I'll give you everything. I don't want to lose my life over this. I want placement outside their sphere. I'll cooperate, but I need assurances. I considered the request with a coolness I didn't entirely feel. Offering a partner immunity wasn't small. It was a surgical risk. But Aman's cooperation could unspool the whole operation, the routing points, the backups, the human hands that touched the files. If he gave me his access, we could trace not just Vivian's misdeeds but the infrastructure that enabled them. You need a lot more than assurances, I said finally. You need legal protection that's ironclad. You'll have to sign statements, give depositions, hand over drives. Full cooperation, documented, and then we negotiate what your legal counsel can bargain for. He exhaled. I understand. We negotiated like two people deciding the terms of a ceasefire. He named names, some small, some obvious. He handed over credentials that rattled through the floor of my stomach. There were servers in 3 different cloud providers, routing through VPNs and dead drops. There were shell companies, accounts registered to PR firms that existed only as emails. And there, threaded through everything like a signature, were Vivian's monikers, her callous taste for sowing ruin masked as truth. He handed me a memory stick, a simple thing that looked trivial in his palm. This has raw logs, he said. It's unaltered. Metadata, headers, source IPs. It's messy, but it's real. I felt the gravity of it like a physical weight. This was the map to the machine. I slid it into my bag with the reverence of someone carrying a key. You understand this makes you a target, Amon said quietly. If you go public with this, there will be fallout. The Moreaus are skilled at optics. I understand, I said. And I understand why you came. We left the cafe with the kind of polite distance that men who'd cut deals have. I walked back to my apartment holding the memory stick like a tiny, dangerous stone. The city air felt colder than when I'd arrived. I sat at my kitchen table and placed it beside the drawer. The crack in the teacup caught the light and threw a crooked line across the wood. I called Rory first. He arrived within the hour, eyes bright, bag of tools slung over his shoulder like a clumsy knight. He connected the drive to an air-gapped machine, refusing to let anything touch the internet. We watched data crawl across the screen, IP chains, timestamps, logs that traced the fingerprints of the forgeries through servers and proxies and finally into accounts that pointed back to Vivian's circle. This is it, Rory breathed, half exultant, half terrified. This shows routing from the PR shell companies to the staging servers. It's not just her handwriting, someone set up a machine to do this, then fed it curated content. We worked deep into the night, cross-referencing files Amon had given us with what Rory extracted. Each match tightened the noose around the narrative Vivian had spun. Each confirmed path transformed rumor into evidence. When I finally called Nan, her voice was a low lighthouse in my ear. I told her everything, Amon's offer, the memory stick, the logs. She said nothing for a long time, as if weighing the moral geography of the moment. Then, finally, she said what she always said when a plan felt necessary and just, do it properly, child. Don't raise your voice, raise the floor they stand on. Her blessing felt like permission and armor. It was the precise kind of counsel that had kept our family steadied for generations. Do not rage, strategize. Make the foundation crumble beneath them so they cannot stand once you remove the illusion of solidity that we began to plan in earnest, the synchronized public and legal takedown that would leave little room for spin. Amon would provide raw access to servers and accounts, Rory would build forensic reports, Detective Mansour would be readied with formal affidavits. Once the chain was airtight, my communications consultant would set the press context. I would stand at the center, not as an angry woman, but as the owner of facts and files laid bare. I imagined the moment the curtain would come down, their faces when they realized the choreography had been unmasked. I felt no joy in their ruin, only the clear resolution of someone who had been pushed into making a choice she'd never wanted to make. Before dawn, I sat with my hands wrapped around a mug of cold tea and wrote the next list for the drawer: names, dates, actions to be taken, people to notify, and a schedule that considered legal windows and media cycles. I underlined synchronize more than once. Precision, not hysteria. If Vivian had built a machine to manufacture my destruction, then we would build a countermachine to manufacture her accountability. It would be slow, methodical, unstoppable in its logic. I placed the memory stick into the drawer next to the label that read Project Sunflower and closed it with a softness that felt almost ceremonial. Outside, dawn began to pale the sky. Inside, something fell into place, cold, efficient, unbreakable. The file I found in the courthouse archive was smaller than I expected and heavier than it looked. It lived between yellowed folder tabs and the dust of other people's tragedies, tucked behind a brittle stack of licensing paperwork that nobody thought to digitize properly. I almost missed it. Its corner had folded into the spine of the shelf like a secret trying not to be found. I carried it home like contraband. Nan watched me unpack it on her kitchen table, her hand steady as always. The teapot steamed between us, the smell of chamomile and lemon cutting clean through the paper-dry air. I laid the documents slowly, like someone laying flowers on a grave, invoices, a cancelled check stamped with a date from decades ago, a signed agreement with a Moreau attorney. At the bottom, in a folder labeled in faded script, was a letter from a bank describing the acquisition of a small family storefront, Elda Wynn & Company, and a note about liens and unforeseen liabilities. Nan's face did not change when she saw it. She let the papers rest beneath her fingers and folded her hands in her lap. For a moment she said nothing, the kind of silence that held history. "You found it," she said finally, more observation than surprise. I had 1,000 questions. Why had none of this ever come up? Why had Nan kept it? How had the Moreaus, now living in glass and light and curated tragedy, built themselves from the bones of people like my grandmother? Nan made tea and poured for both of us. Her hands had the same careful precision they always had, the ones that could mend a dress seam, sew a button back on, stitch a wound closed. She slid the cup across to me and watched the steam twist up between us like a memory. "Tell me about it," she said. So I did. I told her how I'd found the Moreau documents, the server logs, Project Starling. I told her about the dinner, the projection, the audio file. I told her how Vivian's lies had been threaded carefully, purposefully, through years of manufactured optics. As I spoke, the corners of her mouth tightened. When I finished, she took a long breath and let out something that was equal parts apology and fatigue. "I should have told you," she said. "I thought hiding it would keep the past from following us. Grudges are heavy to pass down. Why didn't you tell me?" My voice came out smaller than I felt. "Why didn't you tell me the Moreaus built themselves on what should have been yours?" Nan's eyes were steady. "Because when you hold on to every slight, you become another bitter person sitting on a porch and telling stories that don't change a damn thing. I thought it was better to let the past be the past. I wanted you to make your own life, free of it. And instead, they used that past to make a future of their own," I said. The anger that had been practical and cold since this all began collapsed into a softer, angrier ache. "They used what they took from you to take from me." She reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear. Her touch was gentle but firm, an older woman's kind of discipline. "We build ourselves on what we can. I sold the shop because I had no choice. The Moreaus had capital and attorneys. It wasn't pretty, Cass. I didn't want to make my granddaughter carry that weight." She paused. "Also," she set the teacup down and looked at me like the devil was finally in the details. "I didn't want you to hate them before you met them. Hating people without knowing them is a young person's pastime. I thought you were better than that." The words landed with a complicated softness. She had been protecting me from bitterness, but in protecting me she'd left me undefended against a newer kind of cruelty, one that smelled of curated smiles and digital knives. It felt like a kindness misapplied. I felt both betrayed and understood. "Why now?" I asked. "Why bring this up now?" It wasn't just curiosity. It was strategy. If the Moreau's rise had been built on my family's fall, that history changed the story I could tell the world. Nan steepled her fingers. "Because you found your list," she said. "And lists deserve context. This isn't just about Vivian's mean streak or Gabe's cowardice. It's about the foundation they're standing on. If you pull that out from under them, you're not just getting even. You're unmaking the lie entirely." I spent the next hours combing through the documents with her, each page tilting the narrative in new directions. The Moreau acquisition file showed how Celeste Moreau had approached the bank the year Elda Wynn & Company faced bankruptcy. There were language notes, terms advantageous to the buyer, and consolidation for growth, and, most damningly, a brief memo from a Moreau advisor recommending using aggressive debt structuring to secure market control. There were also mentions of discretion and non-disclosure, buried like worms in good soil. It was the kind of language that smoothed the edges of theft into legality. Between the invoices and legalese, there were photographs, images of storefronts, of a younger Nan standing behind a counter, apron tied, hands flour dusted. My throat tightened when I saw her younger face. It was defiant in a way I hadn't noticed before. The Moreaus had not merely acquired a business. They had acquired the story behind it, the customers, the networks, the community trust. Those were harder things to buy with money but easier to steal when you had influence. I called Rory and told him to come over. He arrived with his bag of tricks and a kind of sober excitement that I'd come to rely on. If the paper trail ties to the Moreau acquisitions, he said, eyes bright with technical hunger, we can map it. We can show the sequence, how assets moved, who benefited, who signed what. That's not just scandal. That's a case. We started assembling names, dates, and signatures into a timeline that stitched the family's modern wealth to my grandmother's old storefront. Iman's logs, Vivian's forgeries, the servers, everything fit into a map that pointed back to one central truth. The Moreaus had always built a public image of benevolence and legacy while quietly consolidating assets that belonged to others. Their empire had a seam, and it was raw with old hurt, ancestral justice, Nan said, when I told her how I felt about using their misdeeds in public. The phrase felt heavy and righteous in my mouth. This is not just about your reputation, Cass. It's about righting something a system let go. You don't have to be the angry woman who screams, you can be the person who pulls the thread and lets the whole cloth fall. That's when the plan crystallized into something larger. Revenge on its own felt small, an eye for an eye that would leave me hollow. Justice for Nan, for her customers, for the idea that families like ours could be erased by people with better PR? That felt like work worth doing. I gathered the players in stages. First Rory for the technical architecture, his forensic reports would demonstrate patterns of intent and the infrastructure used to engineer my ruin. Then Iman, who, despite everything, had access to raw logs and a willingness to trade cooperation for his future. Then the lawyer, the woman Nan insisted we hire, a cool, precise operative with courtroom scars and a portfolio of wins for clients wronged by corporate machinery. Finally, the journalist friend, a reporter who had a nose for structural corruption and a reputation for rigorous, non-sensational work. We met in a rented conference room with glass walls that made us look impossibly small and impossibly deliberate. I laid out the timeline like a curator of truth, the acquisition records, the forged emails, the Project Starling scripts, and the old bank memo that tied the whole machine back to Celeste Moreau's counsel. The room filled with the kind of silence that comes when a plan becomes a reality and the consequences feel both enormous and necessary. Rory spoke first, walking everyone through sequences of IP routing and server hops like a professor tracing a comet's path. Iman provided context for how the PR engine had been built, where shell firms were housed, and how information had been fed into investor circles. The lawyer asked the right civic questions, statute of limitations, civil claims we could assert, criminal referrals that might be appropriate. The journalist, sharp-eyed and unflinching, asked how we wanted to frame the story and who deserved first publication. As we worked, I felt a strange, steadying clarity. The fight had shifted. It was no longer merely my battle. It belonged to Nan and to every small storefront swallowed by the Moreau kind of expansion. It belonged to every client whose trust had been weaponized as a marketing prop. Before we dispersed, Nan took my hand in the cool conference room light and said, with a small laugh that hid many things, "You are doing this precisely. Not like revenge. Like repair." Her approval steadied me in a way I hadn't expected. It was not vindictive approval but the quiet nod of someone who'd watched generations make the same mistakes and had decided that enough was enough. When I left the meeting, the city felt different. The glass towers seemed less monolithic, their reflections suddenly showing seams I'd never noticed. The Moreau machine had shine, but beneath it was machinery and leverage and decades of choices made in rooms without windows. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the drawer open beside me. I slid the new timeline documents into Project Sunflower and closed it with a reverence I felt in my bones. Justice was no longer about making someone pay for a single lie, it was about returning the story to its rightful editors. I thought of Nan's flour-dusted hands, the way she'd pressed bread into the palms of neighbors when money had been thin. I thought of the storefront's front window, once fogged with morning and full of promise. For the first time in a long while, I felt like the list in the drawer was less a ledger of wounds and more a map of the remedy. The roots of their lies ran far and deep. Pulling them up would not be pretty. It would leave raw dirt and exposed foundations. But sometimes, Nan said, replanting required stripping the old roots away. I understood that then, not as an act of cruelty, but as a work of reclamation. The chandeliers in the Arden Hotel ballroom looked like they were weeping light. Gold dripped from every tear, and the air hummed with the kind of laughter that only the wealthy can afford, brittle, manic, desperate to sound effortless. It was the annual Hearts and Horizons charity gala, the Moreau's crown jewel of philanthropy. The event where reputations shimmered brighter than the sequins on the gowns. Cassira Wynne walked in like she owned the room. Not because she wanted to, but because tonight, she did. Her dress was black satin, sculpted and merciless, like armor. Her hair was swept into a sharp, simple knot that showed her face in full, calm, luminous, unreadable. Around her neck hung Nan's old pendant, a small circle of tarnished silver that caught the light every time she moved. The Wynne pendant, from the store the Moreaus had swallowed decades ago. A quiet signature of lineage. A reminder of who was reclaiming what. At the entrance, photographers called names, Ms. Wynne, look here. As flashes popped like small detonations. Cass smiled with practiced grace, every movement a calculation. Inside, she was coiled steel. The ballroom buzzed. The Moreaus had spared no expense, crystal glasses, imported orchids, champagne in towers. Vivian glided between tables in an ivory gown, her laughter pitched just slightly higher than usual. Iman trailed at her side, performing loyalty in a tux that fit too tight. Gabe was across the room, shaking hands with donors, pretending everything was fine. Cass's lawyer, Rory, and the journalist friend were already positioned, one at the bar, one near the AV booth. A quiet nod confirmed the prep was complete. The timing would be flawless. At exactly 9:27 p.m., as the orchestra's violins melted into polite applause, the lights dimmed. Vivian stepped to the mic. Her speech began exactly as expected, soft philanthropy and rehearsed humility. We're here tonight to celebrate compassion, community, and connection. But as she spoke, the projector screen behind her flickered. Once. Twice. Then held steady. A single file name appeared on the massive screen. Project Starling, Archive. The first slide rolled. Then the next. At first, the crowd thought it was part of the presentation, another glossy PR reel. But the tone changed fast. On the screen. A voice memo from Vivian, laughing softly. Make sure Cass's emails look unhinged, not malicious. We want pity, not fear. A timestamped spreadsheet of fund transfers between Moreau Holdings and Shell accounts. Doctored financial documents linking Iman's PR firm to a network of fake advocacy groups. Screenshots, server logs, bank statements, all watermarked and cross-verified. Every lie Vivian had built began unraveling in 4K clarity. The room's glamour curdled. Gasps rippled like electricity. People turned to each other, whispering, confused, afraid to react too loudly. Phones appeared like weapons. Cameras began recording. Vivian froze mid-word, the microphone trembling in her hand. Turn that off, she hissed, but the tech team didn't move. The controls were already locked. From the corner of the ballroom, Cass watched it unfold. The footage shifted again, this time showing the acquisition documents Nan had helped uncover. The proof that Moreau money had been born from Wynne ruin. The logo of Elda Wynne and Company flickered on screen beside the Moreau crest, the truth had teeth now. Rory stood by the AV team, hands in his pockets, calm as an executioner. The journalist beside him whispered something to her camera crew, this footage would be everywhere within the hour. Vivian's voice cracked. This is fabricated. Everyone knows how vindictive. Then the next clip silenced her. A voicemail. Her own voice again, this time cold, clinical. We bury her quietly. If we do it loud, people will ask questions. That was the moment the crowd turned. Gabe's face went pale. The people he'd been shaking hands with stepped back like his suit had grown thorns. His father, across the room, whispered something sharp to a lawyer before storming toward the exit. Vivian's composure shattered. Her smile twitched, her eyes darted. She searched the crowd until she found Cass, poised, still, holding a champagne flute like it was a scepter. Cass took a slow step forward through the stunned silence. When she reached him, Gabe's voice barely made it out. Cass, what did you? She leaned in close enough for only him to hear. You should have listened when I told you your sister was dangerous. Then she turned away. The ballroom erupted. Journalists rushed forward. Cameras flashed like lightning. The Moreau lawyers scrambled, barking orders. Vivian screamed something about lawsuits, but the microphones caught every word, and every word sounded like guilt. Cass walked through the chaos with steady grace. She didn't look back. Nan's pendant glinted once more beneath the storm of flashes, a small, silver moon cutting through smoke. Outside, the night air was cool and honest. Rory met her on the steps. It's done, he said quietly. She nodded once. No. It's begun. Behind them, the great glass doors of the Arden Hotel swung shut, sealing in the sound of collapsing empires. Morning broke not with triumph, but with quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after the last echo of thunder, not peace yet, just aftermath. Kasaira Wynn woke to a phone that wouldn't stop buzzing. Notifications blurred across the screen, news alerts, tagged posts, lawyer emails, voicemail transcriptions. The world had finally seen the Moreaus for who they were, and it was hungry for more. She sat on the edge of her bed, hair messy, eyes dry. Outside, the city was still half asleep, unaware that an empire had burned overnight. She didn't smile. Revenge wasn't champagne or applause. It was silence, the kind that followed when people who used to whisper about you had run out of words. By noon, the internet had already crowned its new villains. Hashtag Vivian Moreau exposed trended across social platforms like wildfire. Influencer sponsorships vanished in hours. PR firms scrambled to issue apologies. Old fans flooded her comments with disgust. I knew her kindness was fake. How many people did she ruin before Cass? Brands pulled out. Contracts were frozen. Her name became shorthand for deceit, a cautionary tale in real time. Gabe fared no better. The Moreau Group's investors backed out within days, citing irreversible reputational damage. The board voted to suspend him as CEO. Leaked internal memos revealed years of hidden tax discrepancies and embezzlement under his watch. He called it sabotage. The world called it karma. Their parents, once the picture of wealth and benevolence, retreated from public life. The Moreau mansion, where Cass had once been humiliated over dinner, went dark, gates closed, curtains drawn. And Amon Cortez? Gone. Rory's quiet investigation confirmed she'd boarded a flight to Lisbon the night after the gala, under her company's account. A single wire transfer to an anonymous Swiss bank followed. Then silence. Pippa Vale, ever the digital opportunist, released one last, exclusive post titled The House That Lies Built. It detailed the family's downfall, spiced with screenshots and carefully sourced leaks. Within a week, she deleted every trace of her blog and vanished from the gossip scene entirely. Even scandal had limits. Cass didn't celebrate. There were no victory toasts, no revenge parties, no dramatic declarations. She simply started cleaning. She opened new accounts, closed old ones, and changed every password, every lock, every line of contact that tied her to the Moreaus. The office she had once shared with Gabe, the same one where they drafted their first proposals together, she repainted herself. Soft cream walls, a single vase of lavender on the desk. No photographs, no reminders. When Rory stopped by to help her move, he found her halfway through scrubbing an old drawer. Inside it, she'd found the first folder she'd ever kept, the one labeled "List" in the drawer. He raised an eyebrow. "You keeping that?" Cass looked at the papers for a long moment. Then she fed them, one by one, into the shredder. The sound was steady, rhythmic, almost soothing. "Not anymore," she said. A week later, she was home when someone knocked. The sound froze her mid-step. 3 knocks. Hesitant. Familiar. She didn't have to look through the peephole to know who it was. Gabe. The hallway was quiet except for his voice, low and ragged. "Cass, please. I just want to talk. I didn't know how bad it was. I didn't." She stayed behind the door, hand on the knob, listening. Not because she was tempted, but because part of her needed to hear how small his words had become. He went on. He apologized. He cried. He promised therapy, redemption, understanding, all the things he should have given before the laughter in that dining room. When he fell silent, she finally spoke, her voice calm and steady through the wood. "Gabe, you didn't laugh because you didn't understand. You laughed because you did. And that's worse. No shouting. No bitterness. Just truth." Then she stepped back and let silence answer for her. Outside, he lingered for a moment longer, until the reality set in that the door wasn't going to open. He left without another word. From the kitchen window upstairs, Nan watched the entire exchange. The streetlight cast a faint glow over her silver hair, her face a blend of pride and sadness. When Cass came up, Nan poured her a cup of tea and lemon, of course. Always lemon. They sat in quiet company, the city whispering faintly outside. Nan stirred her tea and finally said, "Peace isn't soft, Cass. It's earned. You don't get it by wishing things were different. You get it by surviving what they were." Cass nodded slowly. "Then I've earned every drop." Nan smiled, the kind of smile that carried decades of storms behind it. "Good," she said. "Now live it." That night, Cass walked to the balcony and looked over the city skyline, lights blinking like quiet stars. The same skyline she once looked at with Gabe, when she thought she'd found her forever. Now, it was just hers. The air smelled of rain and lemons. The pendant at her neck caught the light from below. In the distance, the old Morrow building was dark, its logo removed, its glass reflecting nothing but the street below, shattered, silent, hollow. Cass took a slow sip of tea. No forgiveness. No reunion. Just peace, sharp-edged, earned, absolute. And when she finally turned away from the view, she whispered a quiet goodbye that only the night could hear. To the laughter. To the lies. To everything that burned, because she hadn't just destroyed them. She had rebuilt herself. The air smelled like rosemary and lemons. Sunlight fell across the kitchen counter in long, honey-colored bands, touching the small things that had somehow survived every storm, a chipped porcelain teacup, a single silver pendant, and a notebook bound in worn leather. Kasira Wynne, Cass, stood where it had all begun, where one careless laugh had once splintered her entire world. But this time, the quiet wasn't threatening. It was full. The house felt alive again. Outside, the garden hummed softly with bees and wind. Rows of lavender and mint lined the path where weeds once grew wild. Cass spent her mornings here now, pruning, watering, breathing. It wasn't about flowers. It was about rhythm. The act of tending, of nurturing something that didn't demand gratitude or understanding. Nan's garden. Nan was weaker these days. Age had thinned her voice, but not her spirit. Her chair sat by the window that overlooked the lemon tree Cass had planted months ago. The same lemons that had filled this kitchen with bitterness once now filled it with light. Nan's eyes still sparked when Cass entered the room. "Look at you," she said one afternoon, voice soft but proud. "All grown, all mended, all yours." Cass laughed. "Mended might be too generous. Child, even gold cracks. You just learn to shine through the seams." They drank tea together, always lemon. Nan insisted it kept the heart sharp. The conversation drifted from gossip to quiet reflection. Cass told her about her new clients, her growing firm, the new office space downtown with sunlight that hit her desk just right. No morose, no manipulation, no masks. Just honest work and calm days. Sometimes, Nan dozed mid-story. Cass would tuck a blanket around her and keep talking anyway, knowing Nan liked the sound of her voice. The garden beyond the window swayed, forgiving, patient. One evening, when the house had settled into its slow rhythm of night, Cass found herself in her study, the same one where she once kept her folder of evidence and rage. Now, the drawer was empty except for a single new notebook. On its cover, written in her careful handwriting. "Things I will never forget." She sat down, pen poised, and began to write. "Who I am, not what they said I was. What silence can do, it heals, but it also sharpens. That revenge is not cruelty, it's closure. That love without respect is only decoration. That Nan was right, peace must be earned. That the laugh doesn't echo anymore." She stopped at that last line. Looked at it. Let herself smile. The list wasn't long. It didn't need to be. It wasn't a weapon this time, it was a promise. Cass closed the notebook gently and placed it on the windowsill. The moonlight touched its spine like a seal. She didn't plan to burn it, shred it, or lock it away. It wasn't a list of vengeance, but remembrance of everything she'd survived, and of everything she'd chosen not to become. A week later, the office opened officially. Rory dropped by with coffee, teasing her about the minimalist decor. "You sure this isn't a therapy room?" Cass smirked. "It's exactly that, for clients and for me." He laughed, then grew quiet. "You did it, Cass. You turned every stone they threw into your foundation." She didn't answer. Just looked out the window where the city shimmered in the distance, alive and indifferent. Nan passed peacefully that winter. Her garden bloomed through the frost, white flowers in December, as if defying logic. Cass found a note tucked in Nan's recipe book, written in shaky handwriting. "You can forgive the world by living well. Don't waste your peace proving you earned it." Cass folded the note and kept it in her wallet. Not as a wound, as a compass. Spring came early. Cass spent her mornings barefoot in the garden, planting lemon seedlings by Nan's tree. The soil was rich, the air kind. She had stopped checking the news months ago. The Moreaus were dust, their name reduced to occasional footnotes in business journals, always paired with words like fraud or collapse. She felt nothing reading them. Not triumph, not pity. Just distance. Sometimes she wondered if Gabe ever thought about that night outside her door. She hoped he had found some kind of honesty, even if it was too late to share. But she never looked him up. Some stories didn't need revisiting. And so, on an ordinary evening filled with lemon and lavender, Cass found herself once again standing in her kitchen. Same counter. Same cup. Different silence. She ran her fingertips across the cool marble, inhaled the soft citrus scent that now belonged only to her, and whispered, almost absently, almost like a prayer. "The laugh doesn't echo anymore." The words hung in the air for a moment before fading into the quiet hum of her home. Outside, the wind moved gently through Nan's garden. The last rays of sunlight flickered against the window, lighting the notebook on the sill, the list I'll never burn, like it was glowing from within. Cass smiled. Not the smile of someone who won, but of someone who ended. Because peace wasn't an ending. It was the life that came after. And finally, it was hers.